We're gonna help you break your speed limit for sprinting, and we're gonna start right now. So in week 1 of this year's NCAA football season, Garage Strength alum Nick Singleton was clocked as the fastest speed. He had the fastest speed in the collegiate football season in week 1. And another big thing that we've used in developing speed programming is being able to improve sprint performances on the track. So take someone like Sam Black. This is an Olympic trials qualifier 2 times. That's a Garage Strength athlete, and he's run a 10.6 in the 100 meters while doing a decathlon. And one of the big factors that plays a huge role is how we've laid out our programming, how we've looked at technique, how we've looked at different aspects around speed and strength, and how that can improve your overall performance and locomotion. And fortunately for you guys, we've got Legend Hayes here, who himself has thrown at 2 Olympic trials, but he's also our speed specialist here at Garage Strength. So we're gonna go through the perfect program, okay, that's gonna incorporate different things around technique, different exercises, and this is gonna be an actual workout that you guys can do today. So you can go to the track, you can go to the football field, wherever it is, go out in the front road, make sure that the cars aren't coming, and you can actually execute this entire workout and then take these nuggets forward so that you can keep getting faster. Okay, so some of the big factors here is that when we're starting a workout, the big key, okay, is that we've got to be hammering mobility. Mobility work is going to improve our posture, okay? It's going to help lengthen us in different positions. And even if we take a recent video that we did where we focus on the hamstring glider, okay? Using something like the hamstring glider, one, in your strength training setup is really, really important for strengthening the hamstring, but 2, it's going to actually ideally lengthen your stride so that as you get out of acceleration to max velocity, now all of a sudden that stride's a lot longer. Our posture will then also be a little bit better. So mobility plays a huge factor here. Now, Legend's gonna talk about some of the key aspects around technique. Then we're gonna go into specific lifting numbers that transfer to this. And then we're gonna get into that actual workout they're gonna use. So we're gonna use this now, talk about this technique and take notes while we're going through the technical aspect. And then we're gonna give you these numbers that are gonna be these long-term numbers that you're gonna work towards in the weight room. And then the program, you go outside today and you think long-term. So Legend, let's touch on some of the technical aspects here. Start into acceleration, maybe a little bit of max velocity.
All right, so one of the most important things from start to finish is focusing on the ground contact. We're looking at the feet from the start. You want to push with the feet underneath you, all right? And from step 0 or from the starting position, you want to push and have a posture where you're able to have ground contacts underneath or slightly behind the hip. Now, so a lot of young sprinters, they tend to want to be as forward as possible to think, oh, that's the best way I'm going to push. But sometimes that leads to a ground contact that's in front of your hip. And what that does is it adds braking forces. So you want to have a good angle to the point where you're pushing forward as well as possible. But the first around 6 to 7 steps, those ground contacts got to be right underneath the hip. All right, so that's probably the most important part with the acceleration part. Now with max velocity, after those first 6, 7 steps, those ground contacts will be underneath the hip, slightly in front, that's okay. But let's make sure that that front foot, we're not striking with the heel first, all right? That's gonna put our hamstrings at risk and we're not gonna get low ground contact times. We wanna pretty much strike with most of the forefoot, almost like you could slide a credit card underneath your heel. That's kind of the flexion you need. So you're gonna ground here, more in the forefoot, nice and tall once you're at steps 8 and beyond, however far you're sprinting, and try to maintain that posture as well as you can. So engaging the core is important, keeping the shoulders nice and relaxed, head posture nice and upright are keys to that max velocity technique.
So if we're looking at coming off the start, like somebody's running a 40, it's gotta be apply a massive amount of force with the lean, but don't have this lean that's so prevalent that you're striking the ground so far forward so that you don't eat it.
Yeah, it's gotta be efficient.
Okay, all right, so now we're gonna go into those specific actual lifting numbers. Okay, so ideally you're gonna work over a long time frame, like 3 to 5 years, to a 2 times body weight back squat. I'm gonna share a little quick one here because we talked about Nick earlier. Nick weighed 225 and he's done 575 for 6. So this is well beyond that 2 times body weight number, but it's a good starting point to get towards. If we think about this, all right, let's just get to that 2 times body weight back squat over the next 2 to 3 years. Okay, then we're looking at something like a power clean. Power clean could be 1.5 times body weight. So that's gonna help you be extraordinarily explosive with what Legend just talked about coming out of the start. Same if we're looking at, if you're doing a full clean, that's typically gonna be about 1.7 times body weight, okay? A full clean is gonna help you with that mobility and with that upright posture, that good core strength. Then we're looking at the single leg squat, okay? Nick did 405 for a triple on each leg when he was in high school. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to do that much weight. If you do 1.5 times body weight, you know, and let's say you're 185 to 200 pounds, you're in high school and you want to improve that 40, that's going to be a great number to work towards. And then finally, every single week with your plyometrics, we should work towards 200 to 300 touches on the ground. So that might look like 75% will be hop based. So think pogo hops, low intensity, almost like jumping rope. Okay, and then about 25% of those touches are going to be more higher intensity based. So think hurdle hops or single leg bounds or broad jumps, something like that that's a bit more intense. Now, let's get into some of the technical components. We're going to go through the first phase of this program. Okay, so Legend's going to give us those first 2 exercises. What are we rolling with here, Legend?
Okay, so the first one is going to be A skips, but we're going to use a dowel rod here. All right, so this is adding a constraint to help with that upper body posture while we're in max speed. Okay, so basically you're going to take your stick, you're going to hold it overhead, right? Now the goal is to have this overhead, which means we're not in front of the forehead, we're not behind, we're holding it nice and tall here, straight above the ears, all right? While we're holding this, all we're gonna do is we're gonna execute A skips, all right? So we're gonna have knees up, toes up, we're gonna be here, all right? Foot placement, straight down the hip, nice and tall, and making sure that core, we don't flex this. Watch for this with your athletes or for yourself. If you raise the hip or the knees and your trunk is moving forward, usually what that means is that your hip flexors need a little bit more strength work, all right? That's typically what that means. So keep it nice and tall and relaxed while those knees come up and down, all right? So that's the basic form, all right? Start with that number 1. Now, the more advanced version is holding this dowel rod above head, but we're gonna do switches, all right? So what a switch is we're gonna have our knees up, toes up, and we're gonna switch the feet that's on the ground, all right? So the goal with this is to pass the thighs, pass each other as quickly as possible, all right? So there's only 1 foot on the ground each time, okay? If you're doing this and both of your feet are on the ground at once, you're not doing it right. The speed needs to be the thighs pass each other mid-air. And here's what it looks like, all right? We're gonna maintain the posture upright, dowel rod above head. We're gonna switch, switch, switch. You can even add a bounce with it too.
Good, that's good. So you'd say, like, if we're doing, I mean, even let's say if we're doing these 3 exercises as a warm-up, how many times through, what's the distance you'd have them cover?
I would say at a basic form, let's go down and back a 10-yard distance about 3 times each exercise.
Okay, so this is gonna be good technical work. It's gonna get you rolling. It's gonna help us lead into that second part of this workout. And this is actually a workout that we have inside of our strength training app, Peak Strength. So we have a sprint-based program in there. You guys can download Peak Strength at peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. You can get into there and select that you wanna work on that sprint-based training. The next part is something that we did specifically with our D2 football guys this past summer. So this is gonna be a big thing that we worked on to help with their acceleration. So someone like Eden Johnson, who's an absolute beast at KU, at Kutztown University, can cover a large amount of distance in a short period of time. Okay, so this next part, we're gonna go into one of my favorite parts around acceleration, and we're gonna get a little bit of hip flexion here, okay? And then we're gonna have slight bend in the knee, and we're gonna try and think about still pulling and grounding directly underneath the hip while we have hip flexion. So this is going to be called Dion's, okay? So this is going to be something that we would do for 4 to 5 reps of about 15 yards. Okay, so I like to do Dion's 1 or 2 reps without any type of load. Okay, so this is sort of like that primer where we're really getting the body rolling now. So we did the technical work. Now we're gonna get into this primer. Legend's gonna do Dion's without resistance. And one thing I just wanna throw in here is if you're doing like 5 sets of this, 1, make sure that the technique's on point. 2, if we have this set up, if we have a very skilled athlete who can play, like let's say football, right, at a very, very high level, we'll do 2 sets with nothing. Then we'll do 2 or 3 sets where we might have a load with a sled behind them that's about 10% of their body weight or maybe a little bit less. Or we also, if we have access to a 1080, something like that, that's gonna have consistent resistance. That's gonna help them feel a lot more force and power from their glute as they hold this to help project them forward. So that's the big thing here with Dion's is that you actually wanna feel that glute max starting to really put more energy down into the ground so that you get that to project forward. So we're gonna see Legend execute this as perfectly as possible. We'll go through this 2 times here, one just showing you in the beginning maybe, and then the second one we'll go through that like 10 yards so you guys can see and take this out to the track, out to the football field, in your front yard, whatever you need to start to really work on this acceleration, feeling that glute.
So important thing when doing this exercise is getting that glute activation. It's a pulling sensation, right? So don't confuse this with a push. That's more of the quadriceps here. Think of it as pulling through and extending more the back side of the hip, all right? That's the most important thing when trying to feel that cue, okay?
I wanna go on top of that too, is that his hip, so think about those switches that we were doing with the technical drills. His hip pulling through is also gonna be triggered from the technical drill, and then it's back to that pulling aspect from the glute max. You better do this perfect, Ledge. Good. So one thing I wanted to touch on is that this summer with Eden Johnson, who's an absolute dog, I think he's going to end up being KU's undefeated right now, and I think he's probably going to be some type of all-conference player. He's an absolute savage. When we were doing Dion's this summer, one thing he brought up is that, so we would do single leg squats 2 days after this workout. Okay, so we do Dion's, and one thing he had said is that when he would do the single leg squats here, we're holding hip flexion, and that's how it transfers so well to acceleration, is that you're doing a loaded hip flexion position while really blowing up your hamstrings and your glutes with that single leg squat. And he mentioned that when we were doing the flex Dion, so keeping that trunk flexed, he had the same sensation just at a higher speed. That's something that a lot of strength coaches lack, is getting that weight room work to sort of jive with what we're doing out on the track or out on the turf. And that's something that we've just really got to pay attention to, is that we need bigger athletes, but we need them to be explosive. So we have to lift, and we have to do speed work, and we have to have them mesh together. That's a big thing with peak strength. So now let's go with this, Legend. Okay, so now we're gonna get into a really important aspect around sprint-based training that I think was a huge point in us improving how we're prepping, especially football players with their top end speed. And one thing I'm gonna touch on is that our athletes here are so freaking strong, right? So anyone who's in a field sport, we are extraordinarily strong, which is how they're healthy for such a long time frame. How we have somebody like Brandon George who's still just dominating at linebacker after training since 6th grade. Now he's a starting linebacker at Pitt with big time speed. Now, one thing that we noticed is that the acceleration from 0 to 10 was always really fast. Then we would see sometimes we would see somebody who would run a fast 10 and not necessarily run the best 40 relative to what they're running with the 10. Okay, so Legend came in and he started to say, hey, we've got to analyze this aspect. We've got to see, we know that based off what we're doing lifting wise, plyometric wise, they're going to accelerate really quickly from 0 to 10. Legend came in and said, yo, let's start looking at flying 10s with like a 15 to 20 yard buildup. Okay, so let's say you take somebody, and this is what we're gonna have you guys do, and you could do this if you're farther out in the season, 6 to 8 reps. If you're closer to the season, keep the quality very tight, very precise, and you might only do 3 to 5 reps. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna do about a 15 yard build in and try to really get to top speed early so that we could then dial in what that flying 10 looks like and break that down so that ideally if we have an elite athlete, they could get to the point of running like a sub 1 second flying 10 if they want to be really.
They want to be top level.
Yeah, so let's walk through. What are you looking for? You'll demonstrate this because I'm fat and old and slow. But what are you looking for precisely with posture, with foot placement, everything along those lines?
Yeah, so going back to those basics, like the ground contacts is really telling on what's going on. Because if you have an athlete who's really powerful, good accelerating, they might want to stay in that acceleration position, chest slightly forward, wanting to push in the hips behind them, but ending up actually in front and breaking those forces. So you want to cue them up to tell them, okay, the chest has got to be upright, and how can they handle that position? So if we were looking and say, okay, this athlete's ankles, they're not absorbing forces in holding that tension well on those fast ground contact times, let's work on this position with the top speed and maybe add in some plyometrics to help improve those ground contact times.
So that'd be like where we were talking about off air with Tai Chi, doing more PVC pipe work, skips, barefoot, even doing some of the ISO stuff where we were doing ISO heel unsupported into like a hip lock to help this.
Yeah, because those strength exercises can help with the technique work over time instead of trying to cue somebody. Yeah, so it is difficult to cue somebody while they're running at full speed. So you want to add in those strength exercises while cueing them beforehand. All right, try to get that foot placement a little closer underneath and try to keep that chest more tall, because you want this position here, full speed, right here, nice and tall.
And you would say this would be like, let's say in a 40, I'm thinking about Ty, you're looking at like acceleration, and then by the time he's at like 7, 8, 9, maybe it's 25 yards, he would start to come a little bit more upright.
Yeah, the first 7 steps is where that acceleration is at that angle, right? Okay. Then once you get to like the 7 steps, which ends up being around like that 12-yard mark, that's where that late acceleration, the top speed mechanics start to play in. Like doing the flies gives them more exposure to that scenario. So if you keep cueing that and running those flies, you don't beat them up as much and you give them a little bit more exposure.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to point out, Ken Clark's got some research on this where we did so much lifting, right, and so much plyometric work that acceleration was good, and we still do that. And then what ends up happening is you bring in these flying 10s, you bring in more max speed work, so let's say 60s, something like that, and now all of a sudden the max speed work actually will increase their acceleration further. So that's like another telling thing here is that we're gonna go into this, and I would say you could do anywhere between 4 and 6 reps of almost like a skip into a sprint at around 15 to 20 yards, and then that 20 to 30 yard line would be where we're looking at measuring that flying 10. And sometimes you could do that even longer, but that's gonna help us also dial in what's their top speed that they're achieving.
Right.
All right, so let's see this, legend.
All right.
Don't blow a hammy.
So another key thing is if you want to do any type of video work, you want to have it about like, it's good to see like hip height, because that's where you're going to be looking at most of the technique work, hip height. If you have it a little lower or higher, it might be a little misconstrued on what you're seeing. So
you're saying if somebody sets up like their iPhone?
Yeah, you're setting up your phone, say like, this is the middle of my turf, set up about 5 yards on each side, or have your markers from where to sprint. Say I'm doing a 10-yard split, all right? I got my line here, camera angle right in the middle at about hip height. So with these rolling flies, you don't have to book it into a full sprint right away. Roll into it, right? Roll into it and then really focus on getting maximal effort once you hit that marker where you're trying to hit that fly.
He's got a throw session after this. He better not be hurting his hamstring right now. He better have perfect technique. Thinking about this is like, if you look at sprinters, right? And I was even thinking about Xavier Worthy ran a 4.21, clocked at 24.4 miles per hour. I was gonna bring up a little troll thing where Elaine Thompson Hera was clocked at 24.9 miles per hour. Obviously, the race is longer in the 100, so she could get to top speed a little bit later than Xavier Worthy. But it's interesting when you see how important, you know, at that top speed, being twitchy with, you know, you've talked about this with that short ground contact time. It's like, this is where impulse comes into play, is how much force can you put into the ground in an extraordinarily short period of time. And I wanted to bring that up because even looking at some of the research from Tokyo, Yulimar Rojas, who's the Olympic champ in the triple jump in Tokyo, she was running at faster than both of them, 40 kilometers per hour. And the interesting part there is like a jumper, so doing plyometrics, who's also extraordinarily strong. She can power clean well. She does a lot of quarter squats as well, very heavy. That can lead to improving that contact time to be shorter while still applying a
Insane.
5 times plus
Yeah.
body weight force into the ground.
Exactly.
That's like you putting in what? Over 1,000 pounds of
over
force
1,000 pounds.
in a short time frame.
And I think an important key to remember too is it doesn't feel like a push necessarily. It's a strike, and it's a reactive strike. So it feels like you are bouncing.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's a key thing with a lot of the guys that are stronger and they're good at accelerating. They want to keep feeling that push feel. Once you get to that top speed, it doesn't quite feel like that anymore. It's a strike. Your foot is striking as fast as possible, and you want to feel more of a bounce than a push.
And that's where I think even looking at how we'll do hops versus jumps, that's where like a pogo hop comes into play.
Exactly.
It's teaching you to have that bounce.
Yeah, just to absorb and release that energy as opposed to trying to get maximal force from those jumps.
I want to bring. I was talking to Aaron Gadsden, who coached this year's Olympic champ in the triple, Thea Lafon. Aaron was talking about elasticity, and he's like, I think elasticity is being able to put force and get force out within 150 milliseconds. And when they're doing 90K power cleans, you know, for a triple with Thea, to try and improve that aspect while also on the runway doing single leg bounds and stuff, he's like, that's what we're focusing on to get that bounciness. So it's like, and it takes a while. It's a skill. It takes a lot of these reps here to really develop that.
Yeah, it does. And it's an adaptation just like anything else. And sometimes you don't feel that right away. So that's why sometimes the weight room is the best place to get that.
For somebody, exactly, who's not as twitchy to really start to develop that.
Yeah.
All right, let's see one more legend.
All right. Shit, I was hoping you said one and done, baby. This is the most perfect run you'll ever see, all right? So pay attention. Okay.
That's 260 pounds just coming at you. So this is a big thing. Go back. Okay, we're going through, you've got those numbers, the explosive numbers. We got one more thing to show you, one more exercise that's key here. We gave you the explosive numbers in the beginning, right? We talked about Sam, we talked about what Nick was targeted at with his time. We gave you Nick's lifting numbers, just a lot of that's from high school and college. But now we started off with those technical drills that got everything going. Okay, you start to think about how that gets applied. We got into the Deons. Okay, so the Deons, what you want to feel with that, with the glutes. We just did those walk-in, the flying 10s here, so we can sort of see that transfer. Now we're gonna give you one more exercise. This is essentially sort of like the last thing that your body's gonna remember in this session. It's low intense, but it's gonna have a carryover to your posture and to the hip issue that we were talking about, where some people might have an issue where they're slow bringing the hip through, or they lack that actual core, as we refer to it, that dynamic trunk control, they lack that. So when they bring their hip through, they're flailing all over the place. This next exercise sort of pieces all of this together. Okay, so last thing here, part of the workout is going to be around improving that trunk control with the hip work. Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna do, we would do all that work first, right? We get through everything, then we come in, okay, now I want you to think about trunk work. This is gonna be a lower intensity feeling. This is gonna be a lower intensity aspect of the actual day, but let's try to feel what we did at high speeds now with slower speeds to piece everything together. Something simple like this. You can get here and just try to hold, switch, hold, switch. See me like bounce in the air, boom. And we want this position to almost mimic what we were doing in the beginning with the dowel rod. okay? Somebody like me who's really tight, it's very beneficial for the shoulder mobility, for that thoracic extension, while holding a little bit of flexion in your abs and then feeling that hip do its work. And then Legend's gonna show us the second movement here. You can do these, let's say 2 sets of 7 to each side, 2 sets of 17 here. We're gonna finish with that trunk control work, and that's gonna be that perfect sprint workout to smash your speed limit. So Legend's gonna give us this.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna grab our paraelastic bands that you can find on garagetrain.com. So throw the handles over the shoelaces.
You want to hold me? Like
No.
a baby?
Oh, no. Heck no, I don't need that. So you're just gonna scoot back, make sure the band's tight before you go. You're gonna lean all the way down on the ground, and all you're gonna do is you're gonna bring both knees up. All right, squeezing that core and the hip flexors.
And look at
All
his
right.
feet too.
Yep, and toes up, knees up. Everything we do, right? And if you feel a little tension in your lower back, you feel like your back can't handle it, go ahead, slow those hands underneath, and you'll be okay. Right here.
One cue on that too, if you do feel that, try to push through the belly button down so you get a little flexion. And that's almost gonna be like what we've done in the past with like the ironclad abs. There you go. There you go. You see that little bounce first thing in the morning. Ooh. Yeah, so, and now if it still hurts after you push the belly button down, then you take Legend's trick with the hands. And I think this is a big thing here, is that when you guys are looking at speed, a lot of you think, I'm 17, I'm 18, I've reached the fastest I'm ever gonna run. And it's like, dude, you can squeeze so much out of technique. You can squeeze so much out of improving your touches with jumps, so much out of improving your strength and improving your mobility. That's what we've done for you in our sprint-based program, which is available at peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store, or the Apple iOS Store. Because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power.
Peace.